Hey, those of you that got little ornaments, can you kind of look up at the screen there? Because I think Alan was here earlier. He might be watching. Can you just raise your hand and say, thank you, Alan? Thank you, Alan. Oh, that's nice. I'm not sure what it is about the Easter season, but I think this year more than ever, the whole journey of Holy Week, the Last Supper, and the procession to the cross, and the death of Jesus, and now the hope of the resurrection. I've kind of needed that message now more than ever. And maybe it's just because of all the stuff that we've been through for the last 2+ years. The pandemic and the tragedy in Ukraine, that just need to grab on to that message of hope and the message of Easter. And also during Easter is the time that I miss my loved ones the most. You know, like my mom and dad, Grandma and Grandpa, the people that have kind of come. And for some reason, it's maybe it's just the sunshine and the earliness of a sunrise service and just the hope of spring. I always remember that as a little kid, being at my grandparents' house was just one of the most special days. You know, it wasn't Christmas, but it was just something about it, you know. And my buddy at Colonial Chapel we were talking about Easter, and I said, Mark, have you ever done a funeral where the minister doesn't show up? And he said, well, it doesn't happen very often. And I said, well, let's say I didn't show up. And he said, piece of cake, Don. I mean, my gosh, what would I do? I'd talk about the walkout in the back. I'd read Ecclesiastes 3. I'd talk about your Easter and the plastic on the furniture and all that kind of stuff that you talk about. I could duplicate your service, no problem at all. Which made me remember those times, you know, when we'd go to my grandparents' house, and after about 2 hours, my brothers and I in our ties, it was about 105 degrees. And we'd ask my mom and dad, can we please get in our play clothes? And they lived in Mount Greenwood, had a bungalow with concrete steps. And we'd play this game where we'd throw the ball against the steps, and I'd be the White Sox, my brother would be the Yankees. And if you hit the ball right at the corner of the step, it would fly over 113th court. And it was a home run. And back in those days, I just thought grandparents were about 74, 75 years old. They lived forever. They never aged. And then, of course, as we got older, you had to learn to say goodbye. And you realize that those people in your lives, they don't last forever. And even at my age, I miss them very, very much. But that's all part of the journey. You know, I walk out in the back 40 almost daily. And sometimes I pretend that I'm going to see the gardener, like Mary did. And I'd meet the gardener out there, and I would look at the gardener, and I'd pretend that maybe I could meet my mom or my dad just one more time. That I could just maybe say something I never said before. And then I realized that that's just not the way God works. But sometimes God appears to us in the gardener, in a moment of kindness, in an act of a stranger. Just in one of those moments when you don't think God is listening to you, and then you sense the power of his Spirit, because that's where the resurrection is. Yeah, Jesus, like our relatives, is not here anymore, but in a way he is here. He's in the face of the gardener, in the face of a good friend, in the face of a family moment, a moment of forgiveness and gentleness. And that's what we celebrate today, the majesty and the magic of God's presence after all these years. There's lots of people and things I think about today as we worship in our church. I think about St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Beecher, Illinois. It was about a year ago that their old wooden church burnt down to the ground. And I think about how they're doing today. I talked to the pastor the other day to wish him a blessed Easter, and to have the courage to decide, do they build a new church or they move in with somebody else? And I can't imagine having our place gone. But then just this weekend, one of the oldest churches in Chicago, the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church in Englewood, a classic structure, was burnt and probably won't be able to be rebuilt. And they interviewed the pastor last night on the news. And they said, Reverend, he was a stately man. And he said, Reverend, what are you going to do tomorrow? And he said, we are going to gather for worship, and I am going to preach about the power of the resurrection. And I just thought that was such an act of faith. You know, our church, this place is pretty simple and pretty humble. But I realized just looking at you and thinking about my family and my job, it's just such a gift to have a place to come to. a place to worship on Easter morning, a place to come and have a cup of coffee on a Wednesday or Thursday, a place to come during the week, wondering if the minister does work besides just on Sunday morning. Maybe just a friend down the block who doesn't have a church and they need a church, and you bring them over here and they have a church for a funeral or a wedding. Just to have a place which is sacred. And we do have a sacred place here. And it's such a blessing. And I think of those people when that space is taken away and pray that they know that even in the distance, that we are brothers and sisters. And of course, and then there is Ukraine. And I know it's tempting not to watch the news, but I got to. We do. Because we need to see sometimes, I guess, the power of evil and destruction. So we realize what a gift it is to be surrounded by the power of goodness and generosity. I watched that man this morning walking through the town that is basically gone. And he says, that's where I used to live. That's where I used to shop and have coffee with my friends. And all that is gone. And that could be you. It could be me. And maybe we can't fix it. But we can do the best we can to pray and to reach out and try to bring a moment of kindness and generosity to people who have lost so much. Yes, sacred space. And you know, there's no excuse for invading the sacred space of somebody else. There's no excuse for destroying what is sacred to somebody else. And as I watch that and think about our brothers and sisters at the Ukraine church just down the block on 131st Street, I realize the bind and the power of goodness that brings us together. So whatever happened on that first Easter, well, it's kind of a mystery. All I know is that Mary saw a gardener, didn't know the gardener was Jesus, because in that gardener, Mary discovered that even though Jesus, the man that she loved, was gone, that his presence and his spirit would forever live in a gardener, in a good friend, in an act of kindness. Every moment of generosity, every moment that you dare to bring hope into the life of somebody else, that is what Easter is all about. And whatever religion we may or may not be, it's that invisible, intangible presence that gives us the courage to face tomorrow. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed.